War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, Dexter, Faces of Empire, Part 3. He watched with his good eye as the steamer approached the dock. He could barely see it through the dense fog as it crept forward while men waited ashore to catch the mooring lines. It had been almost 2 years since he last saw Margot Weiss, the woman who created the prosthetic mask he wore daily. He had not expected her to accept his invitation to visit. The war still raged across Europe, and there were surely countless wounded men who needed her skills. Besides, once he had returned to England, he assumed he would become little more than another patient she once treated. But he had received a return letter just 3 months later. She had seen enough of war, injury, and battered, defeated men. She needed a change, and felt England was just the change she needed. Now here he was, minutes away from seeing her again. The woman who restored his confidence. The woman who became his friend. The woman he had fallen in love with, even though she did not know that last part yet. At some point during his moment lost in thought, the gangway had been moved into position and people had begun streaming down toward the dock. A familiar figure was the first down the gangway. He was not particularly tall, but not short either. He also did not look like he had missed many meals, not like the men at the front. He wore a crisp dark blue suit with polished boots and a dark hat, his walking stick clicking softly against the gangway and then the dock. "Jasper Derry," Dexter remarked under his breath. "Of course he gets to come to shore first." Jasper Derry was the Member of Parliament for Sandford South, Dexter's home, and the seat Dexter was now vying for. This man had run unopposed for the last 30 years, until now. Dexter snickered as he watched Derry trip over a loose board, his walking stick flying from his hand. He looked on as a brown-haired, brown-skinned man in a British officer's uniform came to his aid, before hurrying ahead to retrieve the walking stick. Must be an aide, he thought to himself. Lucky kid, doesn't have to fight. Then he found himself wondering where the boy was from. But then he saw her, and those thoughts vacated. She had been right behind Derry and the aide, waving at him. "Dexter! Dexter Keenan!" she yelled towards him, her arms flailing in the air now as she brushed past Derry and broke into a jog. He walked briskly towards her until they met in a warm embrace. The feeling of her in his arms was euphoric. What he did not see was Jasper Derry suddenly stopping in his tracks, his posture straightening, and his eyes boring into him at the very mention of his name. He was getting used to waking up in the musty boarding house. He had been there for 2 weeks now. He had gotten Margot a room there as well. He was on the 3rd floor and she on the 2nd. That afternoon, they would take the train to Salford, where he had already procured her a room in another boarding house, roughly 3 blocks from his parents' home, where he lived. The train would leave at 2 in the afternoon and arrive at 8, just in time for dinner with his parents. He was not sure if Margot would join him for that, but he would invite her just the same. He rose, got dressed, and took the stairs down to her floor. There, he knocked lightly on the door, and she answered almost instantly. Had she been waiting? He asked himself. He had walked her to the boarding house the night before, helped her with her luggage, and even taken her to a nearby coffee house for a light snack. She had been jovial and polite, but he still found himself nervous around her. Her eyes danced as she stood in the doorway. "Well, good morning, sir." He went to remove his cap but realized that he was indoors, so he was not wearing it. Instead, he bowed. "Ma'am," he returned. "What time is it?" she asked. "You sure are early. He fumbled for his pocket watch and opened it. "It's 9 in the morning. I thought you may want breakfast. There's a small cafe here in the boarding house." "Why, that is very thoughtful of you, Dexter Keenan." "Shall we?" he asked, and began to lead the way. She did not follow. Instead, she stood in the doorway, her face a wry smile. He stopped and turned. "You coming?" he asked her. "I would like to, but the gentleman I'm with did not offer me his arm for me to take." Feeling like a dunce, he hurried back to her, crooked his arm for her, and watched her link her arm in his. "My apologies, ma'am. I was not aware that I was allowed to take you by the arm." She laughed. "You fool. And I bet you believed I truly did not know what time it was either." They walked arm in arm down the 2 flights of stairs and through the doorway that connected the boarding house to the small cafe. There, they sat by a window where they watched people stroll by as they talked. Dexter had decided that this was one place he would splurge a little, so he had ordered them both toast with fried eggs and sausage. Looking outside, Dexter saw the young officer from the ship again. "There's that man again," he said to himself, just loud enough for Margot to hear. She looked out the window and began to knock on it. She looked at Dexter. "It's Hemi." She knocked again. "Real nice kid, from New Zealand. Māori, I think he said." When she finally got Hemi's attention, she motioned for him to come in. Dexter could afford a third portion, but he knew that he was running low after the boarding house rooms and 2 train tickets. "I saw him with Jasper Derry yesterday," he mentioned. "I know. He's Derry's aide." The officer made his way inside and stood by the table. "Miss Margot, how are you today?" he asked. Dexter looked him up and down. His hair was curly and his eyes very dark. He was tall and fit, handsome in a way Dexter did not often see in England. "I am good, Hemi. I hope you slept well. Where's Derry put you up at?" "A small boarding house just down the street. He has me running to get him a newspaper right now." Dexter saw the man look down at him. Margot gave the introduction then. "Hemi, this is Dexter Keenan, the man we spoke about." Dexter stood and extended his hand. Hemi took it, and the men shook. Dexter noticed Hemi look away quickly after seeing the prosthesis. Dexter sat back down. "Pull up a chair, Hemi. Sit with us a minute." "You don't mind, sir? I can pay my own way." "I don't mind at all," Dexter replied. "Besides, I'm curious. Why was I a topic of your conversation?" In the past, the rattling of a train would have lulled him to sleep, but this time Margot was keeping him occupied. The two sat in a small section of the passenger car where 4 seats faced one another, 2 on each side. Margot sat across from him beside the window, while Dexter occasionally glanced out at the English countryside speeding by. "I never thought I would see this place," Margot admitted softly. "At least, not this way." "I used to be able to see it much better," Dexter joked. She slapped lightly at his arm. "Oh, knock it off," she laughed. Dexter grinned. In truth, he was enjoying himself. In the past, train rides had been dull affairs, filled with silence, smoke, and exhaustion. But now, the hours seemed to move quickly. From behind them, the door separating the rail cars suddenly opened. "Make sure they understand that while I disagree with the measure, I'm still willing to support it," a booming voice declared, "provided they make it worth my while." Dexter immediately recognized the voice. Jasper Derry. A moment later, Derry and Hemi entered the passenger car and began moving down the aisle. Hemi carried a folded newspaper beneath his arm, while Derry steadied himself with his walking stick as the train rattled beneath them. As they passed, Derry glanced down towards Dexter and Margot and abruptly stopped. "Hemi," he remarked, "I believe this is your acquaintance from the steamer." Hemi ignored the question entirely. "Miss Margot," he said politely, "it is nice to see you again. I did not realize you were traveling north with us." Margot smiled warmly. "Mr. Keenan was kind enough to procure me a ticket to Salford," she explained. "I have become rather interested in his campaign." At this, Dexter saw something flash briefly across Jasper Derry's face. Irritation, perhaps, maybe even anger, but it disappeared almost immediately beneath another polished smile. Derry stepped forward and extended his hand. "So, you must be Dexter Keenan," he announced pleasantly. "My opponent." Dexter stood and shook his hand. "We should speak, Mr. Keenan. We should absolutely speak." Derry then reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded bill, which he handed to Hemi. "Why don't you and the young lady make your way down to the dining car?" he suggested. "Get yourselves something decent to eat while Mr. Keenan and I become acquainted." Hemi accepted the money without argument. Margot looked uncertainly toward Dexter. He nodded towards her, indicating that everything was fine. She rose from her seat and smiled politely as she brushed past Derry. Hemi followed just behind her, and soon the two disappeared through the next rail car. The moment the door closed behind them, the atmosphere shifted. Derry sat across from Dexter without speaking. For several seconds, he simply studied him, not with hostility exactly, more like a man inspecting something he did not fully understand. Dexter shifted slightly beneath the stare. "Hemi seems like a fine assistant," he offered finally. Derry glanced down the rail car towards the direction Hemi had disappeared and then looked back at Dexter. "He's useful enough," Derry replied, "though the arrangement was never truly my choice." Dexter frowned. "What do you mean?" "His great-grandfather was one of the more cooperative Māori leaders back in New Zealand," Derry explained casually. "His grandfather and father continued the relationship afterwards. Educated men, loyal to the crown, the sort of people the Empire prefers to encourage." Derry adjusted one of his cuffs. "Eventually, a request found its way through the proper channels and made its way to the king, asking that the boy avoid frontline service." Dexter frowned. "And he was assigned to you?" "In a sense," Derry replied. "A small favor in return for years of loyalty." Dexter glanced toward the railcar door. "Does Hemi know all this?" Derry chuckled softly. "Good heavens, no. Imagine the chaos if every native family in the Empire believed the crown personally entertained their requests and concerns." He waved dismissively. "Distance is important in governance." Derry leaned back slightly. "Still, I will say this for the boy. He has done admirable work for a Māori." Something about the way Derry spoke unsettled him. Not the words themselves, the comfort in which he said them. "But I suspect you're not terribly interested in my aid," Derry continued. "No?" Dexter asked carefully. Derry leaned forward slightly, his polished smile now completely gone. "No," he replied. "What interests me is why you believe you possess the audacity to run against me." Dexter had expected this conversation eventually. Jasper Derry had held his parliamentary seat unopposed for nearly 30 years. Men like him were not accustomed to challenge. "Well, sir—" "Jasper," Derry interrupted calmly, "there's no need for formalities between us." Dexter nodded slowly. "Very well then, Jasper," he paused. "I'm running because men are dying in France and Belgium." "We are at war, Mr. Keenan. Men dying is rather unavoidable in war." "Yet many of those deaths could have been avoided." Derry's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh?" "The Somme," Dexter replied. "Poor leadership, outdated tactics, men sent into slaughter while those responsible remained comfortably removed from it." "The nation has obligations," Derry replied evenly. "Belgium, France, Europe itself." "I understand that," Dexter answered. "What I do not understand is how those at the top continue making catastrophic decisions while ordinary men pay the price for them." The train rattled violently beneath them for a moment. Dexter continued. "If the men leading this country cannot manage diplomacy or war effectively, then perhaps they should be replaced by men who can." Derry's face reddened slightly. "You believe our diplomatic efforts failed?" Dexter met his eyes. "Well, if they had succeeded, we would not still be at war." For the first time, Jasper Derry's composure cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. "You have mistaken public sympathy for qualification, Mr. Keenan," he said coldly. "The people may indulge a wounded veteran for a time, but Parliament is not a trench, and governance is not driven by emotion." Dexter said nothing. Derry leaned forward further now, his voice dropping lower. "Understand something clearly," he said. "Men like you do not simply arrive and challenge men like me. I have spent decades building influence, relationships, and power within this country." His eyes drifted briefly toward Dexter's prosthesis before returning to his remaining eye. "And I assure you," Derry continued softly, "when this election is over, you will wish you had remained a war hero instead of attempting to become a politician." Dexter grinned, trying not to show the anxiety he was truly feeling deep inside. "You think I'm a war hero? I think I'll use that in my campaign speech." Jasper Derry's face reddened. "Save your cheek. I'm being serious here." "As am I. Can you imagine it? A sitting parliamentary member thinks his opponent is a war hero. That's a pretty good endorsement." There was a silence for a long while before Dexter began to speak again. "You're in the War Department, and right now, this war has given you a lot of power, a lot of say in the decisions made for the men over there. Men that are cold, hungry, living with rats and being slaughtered. And you support it. But you aren't over there. You aren't fighting. You don't have to live the reality they do. You sit in some office somewhere comfortably sending men to their deaths. Maybe our boys over there need to be represented by a war hero." Jasper Derry sat in silence, his eyes boring into Dexter. He was just getting ready to reply when the rail car opened and Hemi entered along with Margot. Dexter watched as Derry's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the blustery man he had been talking to, replaced by the affable politician that most of the world saw. "We brought scones," Margot announced. He watched Jasper Derry rise and allow Margot to take the seat next to him. The aide, Hemi, stood in the aisle awaiting direction. Margot handed Derry 2 scones and looked at the seat as if she thought Derry was going to sit down. He did not. "Thank you for the scones. I hope you two enjoy yours." He looked directly at Dexter. "Thank you for the conversation, young man. I will see you on the campaign trail." And with that, he motioned for Hemi to lead the way out of the car. Dexter glanced at Margot as she asked, "What did you guys talk about?" Looking at the window, watching the landscape pass him by, Dexter replied, "He thinks I'm a war hero." The sun hung low in the western sky as Dexter walked with Margot towards the cafe they had grown fond of. In the 4 months since returning to Salford South, he had campaigned all over the city. He hung posters, gave speeches, went door to door, and even held public meetings where ordinary people could ask him questions directly. Almost all of it had either been organized by Margot or had been her idea entirely. She was still living in the boarding house that he was paying for, though he hoped that would soon change, for he planned to propose, and he planned to do it tonight. As they reached the cafe, Margot's arm looped in his. She stopped and focused to stare across the street. "Is that Hemi?" she asked. "Hemi? Derry's aide?" He fixed his gaze in the same direction, and indeed saw Hemi. He had only met him twice, once in London where they ate lunch together, and then later that same day on the train to Salford South, the day Jasper Derry bared his teeth and showed Dexter his true colors. She waved frantically. "Hemi!" she yelled across the street. Dexter watched as Hemi saw them, waved back, and with a smile ran across the street to join them, where Margot promptly invited him to dinner. The cafe was small and cramped, tucked between a tailor shop and a tobacconist along one of Salford's soot-covered streets. Outside, rain began to fall lightly against the windows, while inside the smell of tea, bread, and coal smoke filled the room. Dexter sat across from Hemi while Margot stirred cream into her tea beside him. What had started as casual conversation had slowly shifted into something more personal. Hemi sat quietly now, turning his teacup slowly between his hands. "You know," he began softly, "before all this I thought I understood who I was." Neither Dexter nor Margot interrupted him. Hemi continued looking down at his tea. "My great-grandfather worked with the British long before I was born. Then my grandfather and my father did the same." He smiled faintly, though there was little humor in it. "They believed cooperation would protect our family, give us opportunities." "And did it?" Margot asked gently. "In some ways," Hemi admitted. "I can read, write, wear this uniform." He looked down briefly at the British officer's coat he wore. "Sometimes I wonder what we traded for those things." Dexter listened quietly. Hemi glanced towards the rain-covered window. "When I was in Samoa, I saw people still holding on to their language, their customs, their song." He paused. "And I realized I didn't know many of my own anymore." The table fell silent. "I know English history better than the stories of my own people," Hemi admitted quietly. "I know the king's anthem better than the songs my great-grandfather probably sang as a child." Margot reached over and lightly touched his wrist. "That's not your fault," she told him. "No," Hemi replied, "but it's still sad." Dexter leaned back slightly in his chair before he spoke. "I never thought much about any of it before meeting you, Hemi," he admitted. "Samoa, colonies, the Empire." He shrugged faintly. "Here, in England, people only hear the glorious parts, and that it's our destiny to rule over inferior people, that the natives in these places are savages that need to be brought to civilized life." Hemi laughed softly at that. "Yes, that sounds familiar." "But after meeting you," Dexter continued, "I have the feeling that we may have been lied to." He paused again. "If I win over Derry, I will work on changing all of that. It's going to take a lot of time to change people's minds, but maybe you can help me with that." He heard the cafe door open and shifted his attention towards it. A gust of cold air swept through the room, followed immediately by Jasper Derry. Even inside the cramped little cafe, he somehow looked important. His dark coat was spotless despite the rain, and he carried himself with the same confidence Dexter had come to expect from him. Derry's eyes moved across the room until they landed on Hemi. For just a moment, his pleasant expression tightened. Then it vanished beneath another smile. "There you are," he announced warmly. "I've been looking all over for you." Hemi immediately straightened in his seat. "My apologies, sir. I did not realize the time." Derry stepped closer to the table and nodded politely towards Dexter and Margot. "Mr. Keenan? Miss Weiss?" "Mr. Derry," Dexter replied. Derry looked back towards Hemi. "We have an early train tomorrow morning, and yet here you are, hiding in cafes," he remarked pleasantly. "I was beginning to think you had abandoned me entirely." "No, sir," Hemi answered quickly. Derry smiled. "Well then, come along." Hemi hesitated, only briefly, but Dexter noticed it. "So soon?" Margot asked. "We were just having a conversation." Derry chuckled softly. "Yes, well, unfortunately, the Empire has an unfortunate habit of interrupting pleasant conversations." Hemi stood slowly from the table. "It was nice seeing you both again," he said sincerely. Dexter rose and extended his hand. "You too." The two men shook. Then Derry's eyes drifted briefly towards them both. Something about the look unsettled Dexter instantly. Not anger, assessment, calculation. "Good evening, then," Derry said pleasantly. Then he turned and walked back towards the door while Hemi followed a few steps behind him. Dexter watched through the rain-covered window as the two men stopped across the street beneath a gas lamp. Derry spoke first. Even from inside the cafe, Dexter could see the sharpness in his movements. Gone was the affable politician from moments earlier. Hemi stood silently while Derry spoke down to him. At one point, Hemi looked as if he wanted to respond, but Derry cut him off with a sharp gesture of his hand. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the conversation ended. Derry adjusted his gloves calmly and continued down the street without another glance backward. Hemi remained standing beneath the gas lamp alone for several seconds before finally following after him. Dexter found himself in the same place as Jasper Derry once again. This time, in the banquet room of the Ambassador Hotel, where the election results would be read. The room had gone quiet after the results were announced. Not entirely quiet, of course. Men still talked in corners, glasses still clinked together, supporters still shook Jasper Derry's hand while others quietly filtered towards the exit. But to Dexter, it all sounded distant now, muffled beneath the ringing in his ears. He had lost. Derry had won. Margot stood beside him, one arm looped through his. He could feel her thumb lightly brushing against his sleeve as if she was trying to steady him without drawing attention to it. Across the hall, Jasper Derry was surrounded by smiling men in dark suits. One by one they congratulated him while newspaper men scribbled notes onto little pads. Then Derry looked over. The smile never left his face as he excused himself from the crowd and made his way towards them. "Well fought, Mr. Keenan," he said warmly as he approached. "Truly, you gave the constituency quite the excitement." Dexter forced a grin. "I suppose, but losing to you is still losing." "Nonsense," Derry replied. "Most men would not have lasted a week under the pressure of a proper campaign." He glanced briefly towards Margot. "And congratulations are in order, I believe. I heard rumors of an engagement." Margot smiled politely. "Thank you, sir." Derry nodded. "Well then, perhaps tonight is not entirely a disappointment after all." For several seconds, none of them spoke. Then Derry adjusted his gloves and looked back at Dexter. "I've been thinking about our conversation on the train," he admitted. "And while I disagree with much of what you said, I do believe men like you have their uses." Dexter raised an eyebrow. "Uses?" Derry ignored the remark. "My work often takes me overseas," he explained. "Australia, New Zealand, Samoa on occasion. Parliamentary obligations still require my attention when I'm abroad, and I find myself needing a man I can trust to handle certain matters in my absence." Dexter remained silent. Derry continued. "An attaché of sorts, someone who can speak on my behalf when necessary, voice my vote in Parliament." Margot looked toward Dexter now. "And you would want me?" Dexter finally asked. Derry smiled. "You are intelligent. The public already respects you. You understand sacrifice and service. Frankly, Mr. Keenan, you are far more useful to me beside the machine than standing in front of it." Dexter looked down briefly. Part of him hated how tempting the offer sounded. Influence. Purpose. A future. Then another thought entered his mind. He looked around the hall. "Where's Hemi?" he asked suddenly. Derry's expression barely changed. "Hemi?" "Yes, I haven't seen him all evening." Derry removed one glove, finger by finger. "I had him reassigned." Dexter frowned. "Reassigned where?" "France." That word struck him harder than he expected. "What?" Derry shrugged lightly and shifted his glance between Dexter and Margot. He became too familiar with certain people. Dexter stared at him and asked, "Is this about him joining us at the diner?" A smile crossed Derry's face. "He simply became someone that I felt I could not trust. Not anymore." "What is it you think we talked about?" Dexter asked. Jasper looked at him all-knowing. "We just had conversations," he replied, "about Samoa and about his people in New Zealand." "And about me, I trust?" Derry asked. Defensive now, Dexter responded. "He gave me no information about you. He was loyal to you." Derry slid the glove back onto his hand. "Well," he said calmly, "be that as it may, he is in France now." Dexter felt Margot's hand tighten around his arm. Derry's voice became harsh as he continued, "And I hope he dies there." Then Derry turned to walk away. He took 3 steps and then turned back to Dexter and Margot. You know where to find me, if you want that job. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.